Good evening. I know this story may sound unbelievable, but I need to tell it my way. I prefer not to mention my name or the names of anyone who went through all this with me, to protect everyone. What happened was in a remote corner of the state of Amazonas, in an area where news or curiosity from the outside hardly ever arrives. There, life goes on in a way different from what the people in the big cities are used to. I have always been a quiet person. I don't like silly jokes, and I'm not much of a talker either. But after a while, dwelling on everything that happened, I thought it was time to share this account and, who knows, find some answer. At that time, I worked as a volunteer doctor for a well-known organization. I was in my early 40s and traveled through the riverside communities and indigenous villages of the Amazon, helping wherever needed. My base was in a spot relatively close to a small village, but it was still quite isolated, with no paved roads nearby. I went by boat to reach some tribes. The forest is a universe apart, beautiful, but also full of dangers that we city dwellers can't even imagine. Only for a while I even enjoyed that routine. I felt like I was doing something important. The place where I slept was a simple wooden house, a kind of community guest house. Other people who came to provide services also stayed there, such as agricultural technicians and some funai professionals who monitored the demands of the villagers. There was also a very playful indigenous gentleman whom we called Soari. He must have been in his early 60s, spoke Portuguese with a very strong accent, but everyone understood him well. His job was to show the safe shortcuts to reach the most distant villages. This Soari always seemed to be in a good mood, told stories, and laughed loudly when we gathered in the common area. He spoke about the things of the forest and made fun of our city habits, as he himself said. One afternoon, while we were having dinner, a biologist who was staying with us, I'll call him Marcos, began to ask about the fauna of the region. Marcos was a guy in his early 30s, very much to himself, who was there to do field research on local species. He noted everything Soari said and seemed fascinated by every detail. Jaguars, monkeys, snakes, birds, everything went into his notes. Only at a certain point, Marcos mentioned something about a strange creature that had been frightening the people there. At that instant, Soari's face clouded over. He stopped laughing and asked Marcos where he had gotten that story. The biologist explained that he had heard it from another indigenous person and had put together some accounts from fishermen, saying that he had gone there precisely to try to find out what it was. Who knows, even to discover a new species. However, Soari became even more tense and said that this beast should not be studied, but avoided. He said that certain things in the forest should not become a topic for outsiders. We, those present, exchanged puzzled glances at the table, not quite understanding the reason for so much concern. But you could feel that it really bothered the old guide. Marcos, however, didn't give up and asked if Soari had any idea what animal it could be and in what part of the forest it appeared. The guide reluctantly recounted that he had never seen such a thing himself, but knew stories of people who had seen it. They said it was big, very strong, and that some tribes had even tried to hunt it, but the hunters had simply disappeared into the forest. Marcos listened to everything with slightly widened eyes, but maintained that enthusiastic expression. It seemed that the greater the danger, the greater his desire to investigate. And then Soari got straight to the point, saying that the city people didn't understand the forest and that certain things should remain quiet. He got up from the table and left, leaving a very strange atmosphere. Marcos stayed there with us, and people began to ask what that story was about, a mysterious beast attacking animals and people in the forest. He confessed that he had been researching these accounts for some time, but everything was very vague. Only now, being in the heart of the Amazon, the chances of encountering this creature became greater. When he finished speaking, he glanced at us and asked if anyone wanted to accompany him that same night on a search to see if he could find any sign of the beast. The people laughed awkwardly and declined. Then he turned to me and asked if I would go. On impulse, I said yes. I was somewhat adventurous and honestly a little bored of spending so many days just taking care of medical routines and going to bed early. I thought it could be a curious experience, although deep down I didn't really believe in those legends. We planned to leave later. A few hours later, almost everyone was in the living room watching TV on one of those improvised devices that barely picked up a local channel. Suari was also there, quiet. When Marcos and I said we were going for a walk in the forest, some people laughed and told us to be careful. Only Suari didn't laugh. He merely told us to pay attention to the very tall trees and to be alert to any strange noise, even if it was faint. That sent a shiver down my spine, but I also felt a little embarrassed to be afraid, so we went ahead anyway. We took 2 flashlights and a rifle, because in that region, jaguars and other large animals were frequent, in addition to some things that Marcos would use for research if we found any clues. We said we wouldn't go too far. It was more out of curiosity than anything else. We entered the forest with the flashlights on, with the idea of walking for about 20 minutes, half an hour at most, to see if we could find anything different. At first it was even interesting. We saw some nocturnal animals, heard insects buzzing, and the forest at night has a unique energy, a mixture of beauty and tension. After a while, nothing happened besides some common animals. I started to think it was a waste of time. I turned to Marcos and said we should go back. It was already late. He wasn't as enthusiastic as before either, so he agreed right away. We turned around and started looking for the way back, but we walked and couldn't find the right path. We tried to stay calm, but you could see on Marcos's face that he was worried, and I was too. Instead of reaching the guest house, we were just getting deeper into the forest. We stopped to try to get our bearings. It was then that we started to hear strange noises, like muffled, distant growls. We looked at each other, crouched down, and looked for a bush where we could hide. Soon, I recognized a jaguar coming out from behind some trees. It was carrying some prey in its mouth, maybe a peccary or another animal of that kind. I found that incredible, despite the fear. But suddenly something moved in the higher trees, right above the jaguar's head. It seemed like some animal was jumping from branch to branch without the sound of dry leaves crackling. In an instant, that thing came out from behind a thick trunk and pounced on the jaguar. Everything happened very quickly and frighteningly, and the jaguar dropped its prey and began a violent fight with the beast that surprised it. Marcos and I remained motionless behind the bush, trying to understand what was happening in the dark. We only saw quick movements. The jaguar tried to defend itself with its sharp claws, but the creature was the size of a huge wolf with a shape resembling a dog, but much stronger, with long limbs and a musculature that didn't seem normal at all. The scene was maddening. We heard fighting sounds, loud growls, cracking noises, as if the jaguar was trying to bite the creature's neck while it delivered blows that seemed unbelievable. I couldn't believe what my eyes were seeing. That creature made agile leaps, dodged the jaguar's counterattacks, and when it managed to hit, we heard something that resembled dry, heavy thuds. I was sweating cold, and Marcos wasn't blinking. It seemed like we were glued to the ground, unable to run because any movement could attract the attention of both. The fight stretched on for several minutes that felt like an eternity. At some moments, the jaguar managed to break free, but the mysterious beast gave no respite. It was big and had an almost human posture when it stood on its hind legs, but then it would move again like a wild animal with impressive speed. In one leap, the jaguar tried to get away, but was knocked down by a blow that made us feel the impact. And from afar, I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. It looked like a scene from a horror movie, not something real. It was when they moved to a clearing where the moonlight made everything a little more visible. The jaguar was wounded, breathing heavily. The creature, on the other hand, didn't seem tired, only showed a growing rage, as if it was really determined to take down that feline no matter what. There, I could see the beast better. It had dark fur on parts of its body, teeth that gleamed. When it opened its mouth, and claws that looked more like blades, I just thought, this can't be a dog or any other common animal. At that moment, some stories I heard from my grandparents when I was a child came to my mind, stories about werewolves. I had always ignored those legends, thought they were things of bold people, but man, what I saw there in front of me fit perfectly with that childhood fear that many people from the countryside know. My legs were trembling, my heart was racing, and Marcos was next to me without saying a word. It seemed like time had stopped, but it wasn't long before the fight became even more violent. The jaguar tried to counterattack, made desperate lunges, and I heard the sound of leaves being crushed by the paws of both. It was then that the creature managed to grab the jaguar by the shoulders. We heard a crack, like a branch breaking. It was the jaguar's bones giving way to the beast's strength. The jaguar reacted with a loud roar, struggled, and bit the creature, tearing off a piece of fur, but it didn't seem to hurt it as much as it should have. We were in such shock that I couldn't even feel my legs. I just thought that if that thing noticed our presence, we were done for. Then I remembered that I had brought the rifle. I cocked it carefully, put my finger on the trigger, but I hesitated. For a few seconds, not knowing if shooting was really the best choice. At that moment, I felt even more afraid, because if I missed, or just made the beast angrier, maybe it would come for us. But seeing the jaguar being massacred gave me a sudden courage. I aimed as best as I could and pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the forest with that bang that makes your ears ring. The bullet hit the creature's arm, and I saw it recoil, stagger 2 or 3 steps back, releasing the jaguar. In that second, the beast raised its head and looked directly at where Marcos and I were hidden. It was as if it saw our souls. We felt a shiver run down our spines, as if we were being watched by something that understood every detail of what was happening. The beast lowered its body a little, as if it was going to pounce on us. The blood rushed in my chest. My heart felt like a drum. I felt a trickle of sweat run down my forehead and reach my chin. The beast let out a growl that made my whole body shudder, and I swear I had the impression that it gave a slight smirk, as if to say, "You'll pay for this." In that instant, the beast made a very quick movement to the side, and I thought it was coming straight for us. I prepared to shoot again, but it made an impressive leap, dodging through the trees. It seemed to know every bit of that forest. In a matter of seconds, it disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind some fallen branches. Only then did I realize that I had been holding my breath. Marcos was also still, without blinking. The jaguar, quite wounded but still alive, turned around, growled low, and limped away as if it knew we hadn't shot at it. At that moment, we looked at each other, and without needing to agree on anything, we ran like crazy, without even looking where we were stepping. The greatest fear was that that beast would decide to change its mind and come after us. Only we were still lost. We tried to find the trail, but everything in the forest looked the same and dangerous. We ran for about 20 or 30 minutes that felt more like hours, until we finally heard shouts calling our names. Those shouts were from the people who had come looking for us, led by Shadowy himself. They had flashlights and machetes, clearing a path. As soon as they saw us, they asked if we were okay. We could only nod yes, out of breath to tell any details. Shadowy looked fixedly at me and gave a very subtle smirk. At that moment, I noticed that his left arm was bandaged, as if he had suffered a recent injury. My chest went cold. I remembered the shot that had hit the beast in the arm. That look from Shadowy seemed to tell me that he knew exactly what had happened. We returned to where we were staying, exhausted. I lay down on the bed, but sleep wouldn't come. My head was spinning, remembering the creature's gaze, the smirk, and that bandaged arm of our guide. The next morning I went to have coffee alone. I was so out of it that I didn't even notice when someone pulled up a chair next to me. I looked, and it was so Ari. He stared at me and asked with the utmost calm if we had found what we were looking for the night before. I swallowed hard, not knowing what to answer. Then he said, without looking away, that he could have finished me and Marcos off when I fired that shot. But that would bring curious people from the big city, and his tribe didn't need that kind of attention. He said that was our luck, because if the thing spread, it would be bad for everyone. Then he got up and left. I never saw So Ari again. I continued to go there for a while to finish some medical tasks, but he seemed to have disappeared off the map. Marcos also vanished soon after. They said he returned to the capital without a trace. Only those who had no idea of the dreadful night we had lived through remained there. After a while I retired and continued my life with my family in a quiet corner of Brazil. I still hear people talking about those stories of werewolves, beastmen, those things. Most people laugh, think it's all made up, but I remember every second in the forest, that huge beast, the bleeding jaguar, the sight of my rifle. Only I don't give my opinion. If they ask me, I pretend I don't know anything. After all, certain things remain a mystery, and from what I experienced, it's better if they stay that way. In the end, all I can say is that this was the most tense experience of my life. I realized that the forest has secrets that we, born and raised in the city, don't know how to handle. And even if someone doubts my account, I prefer to keep that memory the way it happened without changing anything. It was real, we just don't know half of what exists out there. Good night. My name is Igor, and I've been following these accounts of supernatural things for quite some time. So I decided to share my father's story, Rogerio, which happened in the late 1970s in the region of Guarapuava, in the state of Paraná. It was something so terrifying that it almost ended in tragedy, not only for him, but for our whole family. He and my mother, Larissa, were newlyweds, very young. My father was 19 when he started a family, and my mother was 17. In those days, everything used to happen very quickly. They fell in love, got married, and soon my mother became pregnant with my brother Davy. As soon as Davy was born, my mother went to spend some time at my grandmother Dona Marta's house because she was still a bit insecure about taking care of a baby. As she was a first-time mother and very young, she was afraid of doing something foolish. In the first few days, everything was fine, but one night my mother was already in bed when she heard loud footsteps outside. As that seemed rather strange, she became alert, but at first she wasn't too worried. Only an hour later, she woke up again with the sound of footsteps very close to the window. The smell she sensed was horrible, pure stench of carrion, and it came in through the cracks. Curious and frightened, she approached the window to peek out. She saw a large, dark thing running through the yard and jumping the fence, disappearing into the darkness. She didn't understand what it could be, but she became so nervous that she barely slept the rest of the night. The next day, she told my grandmother, who didn't seem so surprised, and said that from the description, it could be a lobism appearing around there. To top it off, my grandmother even warned that the beast must have smelled the baby, as my brother hadn't been baptized. Yet this increased everyone's fear. A few days later, my father went there to find out what was happening. As he also believed in stories of that kind, he thought it was better to stay with them for a few days. He only needed to go back home to pick up some things and promise to return. After all, it was his family in danger. He wasn't going to leave. My mother and newborn brother at the mercy of a strange creature. Besides, my father said that when he was a child, he had already seen something similar. So he went back, packed a bag, and came prepared, bringing a machete and the shotgun he kept for safety. In the first 2 days sleeping there at my grandmother's house, nothing happened. On the third day, however, he stayed later at work and returned. Around 9 p.m., On the way, he felt a shiver, but tried not to pay attention. When he approached the property, he noticed that the neighbor's dog was barking madly, and all the animals in the neighborhood seemed agitated. It was then that he felt real dread, because suddenly he heard Davy crying and his mother screaming. Without thinking twice, he started running towards the house. When he got there, he saw a chilling scene. There was a huge creature with a body, like a donkey, but the face resembled a dog, and the eyes were so red they seemed to glow in the dark. That thing was scratching the mud wall of the house as if it wanted to get in at any cost. My father went towards it holding the machete tightly. The creature stopped trying to break through the wall and turned to face him. Even trembling with fear, my father continued walking. In the blink of an eye, the beast lunged and jumped on him, knocking him to the ground with a thud. The machete slipped from my father's hand and flew away. He tried to break free from the creature's arms and paws, feeling an absurd strength pressing him against the earth. Completely terrified, he grabbed a handful of dirt and threw it into the beast's eyes, which shook furiously, trying to clear the dirt. That was the chance he had to roll to the side and get out from under it. Trembling from head to toe, he ran to where the machete had fallen, managed to pick it up again, and, in an impulse, struck the creature in the back. The scream that came out of that beast's mouth was so horrifying that my father felt his blood run cold. It sounded like a howl mixed with a groan, something he had never heard in his life. The wounded beast moved its body strangely, but still seemed to have the breath to continue fighting. My father took a few steps back, not wanting to lose sight of that monster. Only the creature, still bleeding, lunged at him again, advancing almost desperately. It writhed all over as if the pain made it angrier, and it got so close that my father could smell that strong odor again, only now mixed with the smell of blood. He raised the machete but felt his arm grow heavy, not knowing if he would have the courage to try another blow. The beast, on the other hand, seemed full of hatred, as if it wanted to end everything in a single attack. At that moment, my grandmother and mother were screaming inside, and Davy's crying made everything even more chaotic. The beast took a few steps, growled, and my father knew he couldn't just stand there, his heart racing. He pretended to back away, making the creature take another step forward, and then he tried to land a second blow. Only the lobisomum reacted, quickly dodging its head, and with its paw almost scratched my father's face. He threw himself to the ground in time to escape, feeling an intense pain in his shoulder from the impact. One can imagine the desperation he was feeling, his chest almost exploding with fear and adrenaline, not knowing if he would get out of that desperate fight alive. My father tried to get up, but slipped on the loose soil around the house. At the same time, the creature took the opportunity to make another lunge that narrowly missed his chest. He rolled to the side, and the beast dragged its snout across the ground, kicking up dust and letting out a horrible noise. It sounded like rage mixed with a strange hunger, almost as if it wanted to tear my father to pieces. Even being careful not to be grabbed, my father was running out of breath and realized that if it took much longer, it could be the end. Luckily, when the beast was preparing to deliver another blow, my father managed to raise the machete and stab it in the hind leg. The lobisomum let out another terrifying howl and recoiled. It was then that my father, without thinking, ran straight into the house. He could still hear the frightened screams of my mother and grandmother, who were hugging each other in a corner with my brother in their arms. As soon as he entered, he slammed the door shut and locked it. They thought it would end there, but suddenly a banging started on the door, as if the creature was throwing itself against it to break it down. Each bang sounded louder and more threatening, and one can imagine everyone's desperation inside, thinking the door wouldn't hold for long. My father dropped the machete on the floor and picked up the shotgun, which was already loaded. He went to the side of the door, aimed the weapon through a crack and pulled the trigger. The blast was so loud that my mother and grandmother screamed in fright. Outside, the beast let out another blood-curdling cry. Even so, the lobisomum didn't give up and continued throwing its body against the door. Only a few seconds later, another shot rang out, this time from outside, coming from the yard. We found out it was a neighbor who heard the noise and came to help. After that second shot, the lobisomum seemed to retreat for good. My father waited to see if the beast would return, but everything went silent. Only his own heart beating could be heard. When he mustered the courage to open the door, he saw the neighbor holding a .38 caliber revolver. The man said he ran over there because he heard the child crying, the screams and the shots, and decided to help. It was a close call. That lobisomum was determined to break into the house and kill everyone. But luckily it didn't happen that night. The fear, however, didn't leave so soon. My mother no longer wanted to stay at my grandmother's house, so my father thought it was better to take her to the house of one of her aunts for a few days. She only returned after Davy was baptized, about 2 weeks later. My grandmother said that after that night that creature never showed its face there again. However, comments about similar attacks emerged in the surrounding areas, and the description was the same. A huge beast, half man, half something else, with red eyes. Everything indicates that it was the same infernal lobisomum that roamed the region. This is my parents' account, and I truly believe them. It's not an easy story to forget, especially because of the terrifying details they repeat every time they talk about the subject. There are many latent legends out there of people who face these things and survive, but there must also be those who never manage to escape to tell the tale. Nobody wants to cross the path of such a creature. Now, I am going to tell another story that seems like a lie, but my Aunt Rosa swears it's real. She was always the type who didn't believe in ghosts, but she needed to live through a very sad and significant moment to change her mind. On a cloudy winter day, she was at my grandmother Celeste's house in the countryside, taking care of my grandmother, who was very ill and practically on the verge of death. Sadness took over everyone as my grandmother's health deteriorated until she passed away there on that cold afternoon. My aunt was in shock, crying non-stop, and left the room to go to the living room, where there was a large window overlooking the woods. She stood there looking at nothing with her eyes full of tears, not knowing how to deal with that pain. Suddenly, she heard a song that seemed to be from a bird. At first, she even thought it was some common bird of the region, but the noise became increasingly disturbing. And then she remembered stories about the song of the Akawo, which according to the elders announces someone's death. Even so, she tried not to cling to those beliefs. Only at that instant the lights in the house began to flicker as if there was some power failure. Terrified, she heard a hissing in the wire and realized it wasn't normal. Then the said bird, which had been on the roof, flew high up and landed in the middle of the woods, right in front of the window. My aunt, paralyzed, saw when that creature that looked like an Akawo took the form of a person dressed in a black tunic. As it was facing away, she didn't see its face, but she was certain that it was someone or something that didn't belong to our world. In the blink of an eye, that being disappeared as if it had never been there. My aunt, who never believed in any of that, was in shock. She had no more way to doubt supernatural phenomena. The stories of the ancients weren't so silly after all, and she understood that that bird really appears when someone is about to die. Experiencing that whole fright on the same day she lost her mother, my aunt came to believe that there are things beyond what we imagine. After all of this, both my father and my mother continued their lives, and my aunt did too. It was a period of fear and shock, but each one faced it in their own way. As for us, we can only say that no one here forgets what was lived, and we revere at the slightest sign of a lobism or sinister apparition. It's better not to risk it. We don't want to face anything similar again.